Hey everyone, it's nostalgia time once again, and welcome to our second and last part of the Windows Server 2003 development upgrade race. So, we continue now from the middle of Beta 3 and into the release candidate and eventually RTM. So, we've got 3505, that's the first build. In fact, all of these builds were compiled between July of 2001 and mid-November of 2002, leading up to the final release to manufacturing build of Windows Server 2003 in late March of 2003. So we have server build 3505, 3531, 3541, 3590, 3604, 3623, 3718, and of course, the final release to manufacturing build of Windows Server 2003. So, what we're doing now is we're loading up the setup on all of them, and as we can see, pretty much the Windows setups on all of them are final. And you can see there are no more mentions of Whistler or XP Server or 2000 Server. There are no more mentions of either of them, or even 2002 Server. There aren't any mentions of those anymore, as now it is changed to the final design that we would see in XP. And wouldn't you know it, the RTM is the first one to load. Doesn't mention evaluations or anything like that. You're just going to format the file system. This mentions evaluation. You can see this is one of the remaining builds that still mention 2002 server. This one still mentions server. And then the final release mentions 2000 server 2003 standard edition. That's the copy I found. It's the standard edition of 2003 server. But here on 2590, 3590, it actually mentions .NET Enterprise Server, and the same story would actually hold true for build 3604, labeling it as .NET Enterprise Server. On build 3718, it mentions .NET Server 2003 Enterprise Edition, so mostly like the final release. And we'll go ahead and format that. Once it comes up here, we'll see that that is the final boot screen for Server 2003. See, it's in this nice long logo, and that progress bar is gray. And in fact, the whole UI, the whole out-of-box experience there, it isn't really an out-of-box, but I should call it install screen. I keep confusing install screen and out-of-box experience in these episodes, but as you can see, that is the final design. You can see it's just like the XP installer, except XP has been removed and just says Microsoft Windows at the top, and then talks about Windows Server 2003 and its features and improvements. And it looks like it's already going quite fast compared to the beta builds. In fact, this was actually the same case too when we did the last episode of the consumer version Whistler install race, because on that last episode of that series we did XP RTM along with a few other pre-RTM and post-release candidate 2 builds. And to absolutely no surprise at all, Server 2003 is the winner. The original release to manufacturing build, that is. We can see that's the final banner there. And we can log in. I actually was able to skip the product key for the final release. And we can see it says, Windows setup is not complete. We recommend that you continue setup so you can install the additional components that are available in this version of Windows Server. For more information about the new components, see the documentation on Windows Server CD2. To continue setup, insert that CD or specify the location where the files are stored and click OK. And then here's a post setup security updates page. So basically it's Microsoft is continually updating Windows to help protect your server from viruses and other security threats as they are discovered. Well, not anymore. While this server is protected, you should download and install all the latest security updates from Windows Update. Well, they aren't really the latest anymore. Well, the latest until end of support, that is, when they ended support for Server 2003, which I believe they ended support for in 2013. Probably a year before XP lost support, maybe. But anyway, it gives basically this is like a recommendation page to install updates and then configure automatic updating for the server. And then here's the server manager. Here where you can add or remove roles and everything like that. So this is a Active Directory domain example. And then this would be a NetBIOS name. The wizard cannot reach the network to determine whether it's already in use or not. And then we can just tell it no, don't forward. During this process, the configure your server restarts your computer before continuing to close any program. So basically what it does is it now copies some other components, so copies some files. I'm not sure where it's copying those from, probably from the disk. And then after it goes through all of this, then it restarts. It says it failed. Now successfully set up as a domain controller, then try running. But that's actually what I've been looking to try and do, set up a domain controller on these servers. And yes, we are almost done because we just did the final release to manufacturing build of Windows Server. And now, when we go back to the beta builds, that one isn't displaying all the way, we are about to see a whole lot of changes. First, starting with .NET Server Enterprise, and I'm sure this would be the case with a lot of the other ones too. So, we are restarting build 3718 right now. And once that loads, we're going to see a very different looking boot screen, a very different one that we would not see in that final release. It was actually called .NET Server 2003. So this is like a prototype concept branding. And again, like I said, this would not be seen in the final release. In 3604 and 3623, it mentions .NET Server Family. However, that branding actually would first appear in 3590. 3531 and 3541 show Advanced Server Limited Edition. That is kind of interesting how they did limited edition branding on this advanced server thing. But of course, they kept the gray progress bar throughout the rest of the development and eventually towards the final release. So there we go. .NET Server Family, .NET Server Family. So those two are in gray. We can see 3505, it just mentions Advanced Server. However, 3531, 3541 still have the XP client install screen. However, they've changed the text messages to mention stuff about Windows Server. And then we have the final design in 3590. However, the text blurbs are a whole lot different. And 3505 are going to be just like those other builds. It does actually look very similar, except the only difference is that the XP branding was omitted from this screen. The XP branding would actually temporarily return in 3541 and 31, but then it would be removed entirely and the background would be changed to gray. It does look gray for the final remaining builds and then eventually leading up to the final release. can see on the banner it reads Windows.NET Server 2003 Enterprise Edition. That's what the banner reads, but the gray gradient there is final. And that loading bar is also final from the client edition of XP. And according to the notes for 3718, there really isn't anything else too much that has changed except for the branding. So now we'll go ahead and log in. So here's the server manager that looks almost like the final release. But otherwise, there isn't really anything else too exciting to see here. And we can see the two-column start menu has been enabled by default in this build, and we can see that at the top, Manage Your Server and Windows Explorer are pinned. And of course, more often we now see only server-focused apps, and less more on some of the XP accessories. We can see that they are still included here in this particular build, and especially in the final release. And this is Server 2003, so everything here is forced to the classic style. And we get the special Luna style in the client release of XP. But then again, it does that fade out. Yeah, I wanted to type more, but okay. Alright, so that's that edition. Now we just wait for the rest of them to install. Alright, so as you can see, we got a variety of things going on here. So we have some unsigned files. There's the Advanced Server Limited Edition boot screen, but we can see the rest of them are done. So we can see on 3505 it still says Whistler Advanced Server. And 3604 now reads Windows.NET Enterprise Server. So we can press Control Alt Delete and log in. And here is that screensaver of .NET Enterprise Server. You can see in that nice lovely 16 colors. And there's the same screen from before. We will just log into it. And then we got 3623 doing the .NET Server Family boot screen. And we'll press Control Delete to log this one in. Same boot screen as before, or banner, I should say. And let's see if 3541 changes the banner, but it says .NET Enterprise Server now. Although in 3541 it still mentions Whistler. I'm assuming this build will probably still mention Whistler as well. Yep. And then here is the full color branding of .NET Enterprise. I actually like the way the .NET is displayed here. Are currently set to a very low level. And we can see there's the two-column start menu. However, manage your server is actually known as computer management in this build. But yeah, configure servers down here, but it's not pinned to the start menu by default. And there's the configure your server wizard that comes up when you load a Windows server for the first time. We'll go ahead and log into this build here. So then again, we have the comments thing just like in Whistler, just like in the consumer versions of Whistler. And this guy is ready. Again, we see the XP icons, which would be in the final release. And then I believe this is the last build that has the classic start menu enabled by default. But the new two-column style start menu is included in this build, especially with all those other builds that we were taking a look at earlier. But then again, everything else here pretty much looks identical. So we can open up my computer and we can look at stuff here. This here mentions XP Advanced Server still. Again, classic style Explorer. And then again, the final shutdown icons. I'll just put in the letter A in all of them. My goodness, the slide down. And then here's the manager server. That's again final. And the two-column start menu, it does look final. The manager server, that I believe is in the final release. However, interestingly, in build 3623 of .NET Server, it actually doesn't ask you for a reason, unlike all the other builds. So that's what sets this build apart from the rest. Because all server builds ask you why you want to shut down the computer and actually keeps logs of everything, as it all happens. For like Active Directory and when it comes to Active Directory and domains and everything like that, it keeps logs of every action that happens on the server, like who logs into the domain, file changes, and whatnot, and then it actively updates the client machines that are connected to the domain, the server domain. So, so essentially, these servers would operate as like domain controllers. So basically, you could configure a domain on the server, and then you could hook up a bunch of Windows Pro computers onto it by connecting them up to the domain and then assigning users and passwords and all that stuff, and essentially giving each user their own account, and they would have access to all of their clients' information, business wise, school wise, or school things, essentially. But it depends on the setting on which it's used for. So, in our next episode, we're going to be doing another install race, but this time with Server 2008, which also went through the same style as with Longhorn, the client version of Vista. However, there aren't really that many builds to take a look at, so we'll see how the server version of Longhorn came to be. But until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.